So you're pretty confident that we're going to have, regardless of even if this doesn't turn out in our favor, what was discussed over the last 3 days, and will be discussed a bit more before January, that we will have a vote on independence.
This is an unstoppable movement. This
Okay.
is an absolute unstoppable movement.
Hi, it's John, and welcome to the channel. Great to have you along. Let me just turn on my light, maybe get a little more light on my face here. Oh, there we go. So much more handsome. It's good to have you along today. Got the big blue mug of coffee with me as usual. I wanted to give you an update on what's going on with the Alberta Prosperity Project. They've been in court this week, Wednesday through Friday. I did my very best to watch as much of it as possible. I'm not a lawyer, so sometimes it went right over my head, but I've got Dr. Dennis Modry here from the Alberta Prosperity Project to talk a little bit about what he saw and how we're moving forward. When it comes to our question, let me read it to you. Do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province in Canada? And Dr. Modry, thanks very much for being here. I do appreciate it.
My pleasure, John.
Okay, so what I understood going into this, and it's interesting because I've never really watched, I watched this online. I've never really watched something happening from court. This was Court of King's Bench Justice Colin Feasby, who was overseeing this over the last several days. Jeff Rath, Eva Chipiuk were there representing the Alberta Prosperity Project. And Mitch Sylvester was interesting. It was listed as Chief Electoral Officer versus Mitch Sylvester. The Chief Electoral Officer of Alberta is Gordon McClure, if I remember correctly. And what
Correct.
I thought going into this, Dr. Modry, was you were going to hear from a number of Aboriginal groups or Indigenous groups and their lawyers regarding the question and whether the question and a referendum here in Alberta for its independence would be an infringement of their treaty rights. Is that's what this was all about? Because I think this got a larger scope over the last 3 days from what I could see. It kind of expanded a little bit.
Well, so to begin with, everybody knows I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, well, I'm not either. So
All right.
yeah.
So from a simplistic cardiac surgical mind perspective,
Radio announcer
um,
here, Dr. Modry.
there you go. There
Yeah,
you go.
yeah.
But I've thought about these things for quite some time.
I'm not.
And when you look at uh, the Citizens Initiative Act
Mhm.
and you look at sections 2, 4, to the average reader, you would come to a conclusion that um, that if you're to have a referendum on a constitutional change, that it cannot abridge section 1 to 35.1 of the Constitution,
If you just give me a
then
second here, if you could,
yeah,
let me just tell people what they are. Okay, so Section
sure.
2.4 of the Alberta Citizens Initiative Act is this: an initiative petition proposal must not contravene sections 1 to 35.1 of the Constitution Act 1982. Now, Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982 recognizes and affirms the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people of Canada. This constitutional protection means these rights cannot be extinguished by the government and includes a duty for the Crown to consult with Indigenous groups on actions that may impact their rights. Just to make it clear so people know where we're going here. And it was mentioned, those two things were mentioned a lot over the last 3 days.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. So when you look at it from the perspective of the Aboriginal people in the province of Alberta,
Mhm.
um, their concern centers around their rights being compromised. But this is an initiative petition, meaning that you can't, from an initiative petition per se, abridge any rights because there are multiple steps. After the petition um, it goes forward, and it will be easy for us to get the 177,000 signatures, then what happens is that the petition then goes to the provincial government. And it's up to the provincial government to make a decision as to whether or not they will even hold a referendum. And if they hold a referendum, then they have the right to choose the timing and the nature of the question. On top of that, any question that contemplates Alberta becoming a sovereign country, the question has to be approved by the House of Commons.
Hmm.
So there's a number of steps here. And I think what the Aboriginal people generally were concerned about, and in a way, it's a legitimate concern, but the timing is wrong. So their concern is that what is the implication to them of simply having a petition go forward to a referendum? And so they're, in a way, putting the cart before the horse. So it's multiple steps between having a petition and then a successful referendum, which triggers the Clarity Act, and that triggers constitutional discussions. And then ostensibly, you need to get to a point where um, the 7 of 10 provinces agree to open and change the Constitution. The House of Commons has to agree. The Senate has to agree. Um, and there you are. And that would be the essence of the negotiations. Now, what I think Justice Feasby brought up as well, and um, I think the Aboriginal people would be concerned about is the way in which um, matters would be handled subsequent to a successful referendum. Okay, like I say, that triggers the Clarity Act. Now, I don't know if I can share the screen or not, but I could take you to what they were concerned about in particular.
Let me see. I've never done this before.
Well, it doesn't matter. Let me explain it to you this way. What Justice Feasby was concerned about was, and what the Aboriginal people are concerned about, is a hypothetical. Okay, and
Hmm.
the hypothetical could be this: that when the Supreme Court analyzed the Quebec secession reference, okay, they concluded in section 154 of that analysis that a province doesn't have the unilateral right to declare its sovereignty subsequent to a referendum. In other words, you have to go through the rabbit hole of discussions and you have to get the other provinces to agree and the House of Commons to then ratify it and the Senate to ratify it in order to remove Alberta from the Constitution. That's the modification in the Constitution. Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
However, Section 155 states something different. It says, well, not necessarily different, but you could interpret it different. Section 155 states this, is that although a province doesn't have the right constitutionally to declare its independence independently, it could make an unconstitutional, okay, it's important to understand this terminology,
Hmm.
an unconstitutional declaration of independence if other countries acknowledge that unilateral unconstitutional declaration of independence, which in fact would be a de facto declaration of independence. And in court today, um, as I recall, yesterday and today,
Hmm.
that our general counsel made the point that 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 let me get my wording correctly again. I'm not a lawyer, but being a
You're
lawyer,
doing well. You're
you
doing
need
well.
to parse your words very carefully. Um, in court, I believe that our general counsel stated that there was no plan to make an unconstitutional declaration of independence. And the Alberta Prosperity Project, in its entirety, has been committed to following a legal pathway.
Hmm.
Now, what came up, of course, was Justice Feasby um, did refer to podcast information provided not only by Mr. Rath, our general counsel, but by myself as well,
Hmm.
we made reference to Section 155. Okay.
Yep.
And he brought it up in the context of us visiting with the US administration. All
He
right.
actually, on Wednesday, I remember him talking about this. He brought up the fact that Jeff Rath, we've had her on the channel many times, has said on podcasts that on day one, the United States would recognize Canada as a country, and the words that UDI was brought up. And Jeff said, I don't recall exactly saying that. I did go back and look at my videos. I don't believe he said it on my videos, but maybe he did it in the past. But this was brought up, um, I think, all 3 days, the UDI. And you want to go through the process following along with the Clarity Act that was determined after the 1995 referendum in Quebec. And do you think, I don't want to take all day here, but do you think that there should be any concern for Aboriginal groups when it comes to just having a referendum here on Alberta's sovereignty?
No, I don't think so at
Yeah,
all,
yeah.
because here are the options. The options are that number one, First Nations could maintain their alignment with Canada. And so the reservations per se, which is about 1.5% or less of Alberta's um, landmass, they could maintain their ties to Canada. They
Hmm.
could maintain their reservations, and they could maintain their treaty rights, including transference across any border. Okay, so they could conceivably just say, no, we want to remain in Canada, and we want to maintain the same fiscal arrangements that we have with Canada. We want to remain as Canadian citizens, as First Nations or Aboriginal people in general.
Hmm.
We want our treaty rights so that we can cross international borders, such as the Jay Treaty contemplates, where um, Aboriginals in Alberta can just cross the US border into the US border. So there's no reason why you couldn't have something similar um, take place if the Aboriginal people said, in the context of a successful referendum on sovereignty, we just want to remain in Canada. We want everything to stay exactly the same. Well, that's one thing that could happen.
Right.
It's the exact thing that could happen. What they're concerned about, however, is that in a constitutional conference, their rights could be restricted. But I see no reason for that. And although that didn't necessarily take center stage in the discussion, what did come out from Justice Feasby is that in terms of Aboriginal rights, they could conceivably be diminished, or they could stay the same, or they could be enhanced. All right.
That's that. You know, what's interesting you say that because I think it was today Jeff Rath said, this would be an opportunity for Aboriginal groups in Canada to actually have a say in their future.
Well,
Because they would have this, because if this went to the one of the end stages, it would be Canada,
mhm.
Alberta, and Aboriginal groups sitting around at a table to determine the future of how things happen. And right now, the Aboriginal groups have their treaties from the past, but they could actually determine how things would work out for them moving forward. Am I not right
Sure,
there? Yeah,
sure, absolutely. Now, I want to make a point,
sure.
and the point is Mr. Rath did make mention of, some of the reservations have not done very well. In fact, many
Yeah,
of them have not done very
yeah,
well.
yeah.
There are some reservations that still don't have fresh drinking water.
Hmm.
That, to me, is a failure of federal governance, I should say. But what never came out today is that for First Nations, their average survival rate is 19 years less than it is for non-Aboriginal people in the province of Alberta. So that
Didn't know that.
informs the listener that, in fact, many people, particularly First Nations people, many of them are severely compromised. And why is it that they would not want to find themselves in a better circumstance?
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
number one, we could say that um, First Nations people, Aboriginal people in general, could simply avoid a constitutional conference and say, we're not going to participate in a constitutional conference if there's any risk of, of our rights being diminished. Okay, they conceivably they could do that,
Mhm.
um, and or just not attend and say we're going to remain in Canada. All right, so constitutional conference then takes place, and nothing changes with respect to Aboriginal people. They have all their rights. They cross the borders the way they are now, and life goes on. Subsequent to a constitutional conference, um, one of the conclusions could be that at any point in the future, um, Aboriginal people or First Nations people could come to Alberta and say, we would like to negotiate becoming part of Alberta and get out from under the control of the federal government. They could do that at
Mhm.
some point in the future, ostensibly. So I think to a very large extent, and I mean this sincerely because I have a heart, as you know, being in the medical profession, my role has been to help people. And it really bothered me when I heard that their survival rate was 19 years less.
I didn't know
So,
that. Yeah, it's crazy.
so from my point of view, and I think this reflects the majority of people with respect to the Alberta Prosperity Project, if not the majority of Albertans, if not all Albertans, would want to see this disparity in survival resolved, and therefore would be supportive very much of wanting First Nations to have a better deal. But that does not mean that the rest of Albertans need to be extorted. All right. So, what it means is that First Nations can remain in Canada under the current terms, or they can participate in a constitutional conference in which their freedoms are respected, their treaties are respected, um, but the outcome of all of that is subject to negotiation. So would it be the case, for example, and I don't know this, that the outcome is that they become a citizen like everybody else, where they have a similar justice system, they pay no taxes because that is what is contemplated for the rest of Albertans is that
Mhm.
they will pay no taxes either, including property tax.
Mhm.
And so we have really one citizen, but they have something in which they have these treaty rights where they can cross borders. And whereas I'd like to say that we can do that as well, but perhaps Alberta as a sovereign country would have similar rights because we're Canadian citizens.
Mhm.
Alberta citizens are still Canadian citizens, so we would still be able to cross the borders as well.
It sounds to me that this actually provides the Indigenous groups with more options moving forward. Do you think that the council representing Mitch Sylvester, CEO of the Alberta Prosperity Project, Jeff Rath, do you think he made the point here? And do you think the Justice Colin Feasby, do you think he was open to what was being said here? How do you think he perceived what was being told to him by the Alberta Prosperity Project? And do you think that, well, I guess maybe the question to ask you, do you think we won our case today? I know that it's going to go on for a little bit longer. There's going to be some more discussion about this, but how do you think we did today
I
and over
think
the
we
last 3 days?
did, yeah, yesterday and today, I thought we did excellent
Hmm.
because if, as you recall, it appeared as though both sides were focusing on two things. One, does the simple posing of a question um, contradict in Aboriginal rights? Okay. And second, will it adversely affect borders? And I don't think the amici or the uh, representative, the legal counsel for the First Nations,
Hmm.
made a case that was sufficiently persuasive that our question should not go forward. So I don't think our question contravenes Section 1 or 35.1 at all. And it's hard to go 4 steps further to get to that point because it simply does not. It only triggers um, the provincial government to consider whether or not to hold a referendum, and if so, based on what question, and if so, what is the timing. So I think he's going to rule on whether our question alone contravenes Section 1 to 35.1,
Mhm.
and whether or not our question compromises their mobility rights. And I can't see how it does in
What
both
I'm
instances.
what I'm concerned about here, and what I was thinking while I was watching this over the last 3 days, is how does this infringe upon the rights of a vast majority, which I think is a vast majority of Albertans who actually want to have a referendum? A small group of people, Aboriginal people in Canada, represent about 5% of the population. A very small percentage of the population in Alberta could be holding back a vote on something like this, and that's what concerns me about this. If we're denied this opportunity, our rights are being infringed upon, don't you think?
Well, yes, that is the case.
Yeah,
However, what is the fallback position?
yeah, yeah.
The premier and the provincial government, the UCP party, they're in a difficult situation because the majority of their members are in favor of sovereignty. So this is a potential powder keg for the provincial government.
And tick, tick, tick.
Um,
About a week from now, they're going to be sitting
well,
at their AGM, correct? Yeah,
yeah, at
yeah,
the AGM.
yeah.
But when I say it's a powder keg, what it means is a massive splitting of the party. Okay. Now,
Mhm.
I know there are people that are going to say, well, we don't want to split the party because of
Ned Nenshi and the
because
NDP.
yeah,
Yeah,
we don't want the
no, no.
NDP to get in. And so just on that risk alone, I believe that the provincial government itself will hold a referendum wherein it does not, and this is the agreement of the amici as well to the judge. They made the case that the legislature, the government, is not bound to the same degree as a citizen because the legislature represents the population of Alberta. Okay.
Yep.
Government represents the population of Alberta. So if the government decides that it's necessary to diffuse a potential powder keg and hold an honest referendum that is compliant with the Clarity Act, then I think there is an extremely high probability that the provincial government will hold a referendum on that basis. Okay. If they don't, then they run the risk of splitting the party. And I want to comment on that for a second
Sure.
because it is true, many people have said that that's the last thing they want to see is for the NDP to get in. All right. So that is one point. But let's look at what was happening prior to the 2015 provincial election, where the Wild Rose was competing with the provincial Conservative Party, the Progressive Conservative Party. And the Wild Rose Party was leading in the polls and had a very high probability of winning, right? That's
Hmm.
true. What does that tell you? It tells you that the people that were supporting the Wild Rose Party, there was also an NDP party, right, at that time,
Yep.
but the people that supported the Wild Rose Party had one thing in common. Do you know what that was? The courage to win. The courage to win, to get out from under what had been viewed as a progressive conservative party that had gone too far to the left and had become, in essence, a federalist party that
Yep.
was ineffective in terms of dealing with the federal government. That's what the Wild Rose Party had, the courage to win. So the question comes up then, if it were necessary to deal with a provincial government that was unwilling to hold a referendum on sovereignty, okay, then there
Yep.
are two options. You do what you can to try and take control of the UCP party, or you form another party. In both cases, you have the question posed to the members, do you have the courage to win? Because if you have the courage to win, then you have the courage to be able to say, we are going to win this, and we are going to take the risk that an NDP party could um, arise again
Right.
and I mean win an election. But I don't think that's probable. I think in a very real way, and I want your listeners to look me in the eye and ask yourself the question, do you have the courage to win? Do you have the courage to change the UCP if necessary? Or do you have the courage to win with a new independence party that maybe all the parties come together? I don't know what the right answer is, and we're going to get some information, aren't we, as a result of the um, machinations at the AGM.
Yes.
We're going to get another answer when we hear the result of the court proceedings, which I suspect now will come before mid-January. So let's say, for argument's sake, the court rules that we can go ahead with our petition question, in which case we do that, and at some time in the late spring, the Elections Alberta has the signatures, and the provincial government has the petition, successful petition, and then they make a decision as to when they will hold a referendum. So that's really where we are right now. But
You make me feel
I want your people to
okay.
listen about this point I'm making.
Okay.
It's the courage to win. All right.
Well, I was thinking I like quotes, and I think the quote is "Fortune favors the brave," right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're pretty confident that we're going to have, regardless of even if this doesn't turn out in our favor, what was discussed over the last 3 days, and will be discussed a bit more before January, that we will have a vote on independence one way or the other. Because I know Keith Wilson told me that here. He said that when we were at the independence rally a few weeks back in Edmonton as well. You're pretty confident about that.
This is an unstoppable movement. This
Okay.
is an absolute unstoppable movement. Just like I think what's happening in Quebec right now.
Yeah. Well, I think it was brought up yesterday. There was an article in the National Post talking about they're basically declaring independence. They're unilaterally declaring independence in Quebec right now. And, they're moving towards a provincial election. Legault knows he may be on the way out. The Parti Québécois they want to be independent once again. It's interesting times, isn't it? Really interesting times in Canada, as
Well,
well as here in Alberta, for sure.
it's funny when you bring up Mr. Legault, it makes me think about a comment he made a number of months ago.
Yeah.
And he said we would be embarrassed if Alberta left first.
Yeah. Yeah, they've tried a couple of times. I remember
Yeah.
it was back in 80 and it was in 95. I remember in 95 a lot more than 80. It was only 15 at the time, and it was René Lévesque, I believe, wasn't it, at the
Yeah.
time? I remember him crying in the forum as they
Yeah.
lost that vote by quite a bit. But I feel better about this. And for being a doctor, you did a good job discussing what happened in court the last 3 days. I'm glad you were here because at times it could go right over your head. There was so much talked about. I know you're talking with Jeff Rath, who was there representing the APP, and of course Mitch Sylvester, who was sitting with you for several days through there. I appreciate you talking to me and passing along this information. Thanks so much. I hope to talk to you again real soon. Hope to see you again soon.
Very good, John. Pleasure, as always.
Dr. Dennis Modry from the Alberta Prosperity Project, thank you very much. And if you like this video, please share it. You can give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications as well. I'll see you in the
Take
next one.
care. Bye bye now.